Positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at delivering something, some value that a very well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. You can think of it a little bit like context setting for products. Like it kind of takes a customer that doesn't know too much about your stuff and kind of orients them towards your value so that they can figure out what it's all about. At a very fundamental level, it's the answer to the question, like, why pick us over the other guys? Like, why pick us over anything else you could do?
Hello and welcome to One Night in Product, the show where I chat to some of the brightest minds in product from across the globe to help you see product management in a whole new light. If that sounds up your street, don't forget to dive into the back catalogue on your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. And of course, follow, share, drop me a comment or review. It all helps keep the lights on. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome back for the third time my good buddy, one of my favourite people in product marketing, the one and only April Dunford. April's the renowned author of Obviously Awesome, which has sold over 100,000 copies and stands as a desk reference for product positioning, as well as Sales Pitch, which tries to help people sell the damn product after they've positioned it. Anyway, April's now cannibalizing her own book sales with her new book, Obviously Awesome, a new and updated edition which I'm sure promises to make all this stuff easy. And now there's only 5 steps to the process. I'm sure we'll all be done by tea time. April, thanks for coming and welcome back.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for having me. I didn't realize it was the third time. I thought this was the second time. Oh boy.
No, we did Obviously Awesome one,
Third
and then we did Sales Pitch, and here we are again.
Well, this will be the last time then, because I ain't writing no more books. So that's the end of that.
But anyway, let's talk about that. So obviously, as I say, we've spoken a couple of times on the podcast. We've obviously caught up a couple of times in person in town. But you've got the book. That's out and new and definitely something to talk about. But other than that, what's keeping you busy these days? What's on April Dunford's agenda these days?
Oh, well, I'm busy with clients, obviously. And yeah, I just put this new version of the book out. So I've been in the middle of book launch stuff lately. But then I don't know. I got lots of personal stuff going on too. I'm building a new cabin in the woods. This is my side project that's going on right now. And yeah, and I'm really sick of the weather. I'm in Toronto. We've had the worst winter ever. And so next week I'm going to the beach. That's what's going on with me.
Well, these are all good things, and I'm looking forward to seeing pictures of the cabin when it's done as well. I mean, I just assumed that everyone
this is not stuff I post on social media at all. So you're gonna have to come to Canada to see how that is. But yeah, but it's a fun project.
Yeah, no, I mean, something that I would fail to do. I don't think we get away with cabins in the UK anyway. I mean, we don't have the kind of the climate for it, or the big forests or the wolves or anything like that. But
that's right. You need wilderness, man.
One day. Right. As discussed, you do have a new version of the book out. And of course, the first version of the book was incredibly popular. Everyone loved it. And you've, been kind of working the process for that with clients for a few years now. And then obviously Sales Pitch came out. But whenever someone comes out with the second edition of a new book, or a popular second edition of an old book, like a popular book that's done the rounds and probably a lot of people already read, there's always kind of this question in the back of your mind, why is there a second edition? What was the reason? What spurred it? So I guess that's the first question to you. What was it that caused you to think, hey, it's time to write book or version 2 of this book?
Yeah, a handful of things. So the first one is, it's been 6-7 years. And I've worked with a lot of companies since the first book came out. And, and one of the side effects of working with lots of companies on a thing is that your thinking evolves on it. And so a handful of things. So one was, there were a set of sticky situations that I could see the pattern in once I'd done 200 companies, 300 companies, that I didn't see the pattern in when it was 60 companies, 70 companies. So there was that. So there were things that I wish I had included in the book that I didn't include in the book because I just didn't see that stuff. That was one thing. Second thing was, there were a handful of things in the book that my thinking evolved. I wouldn't say it totally changed my mind about anything because this stuff is kind of fundamental. But there's some things that my thinking on it evolved, and I thought, man, if I was writing that now, I would write that differently, or I would put a slightly different spin on it. And then the last thing was that, the book sold a lot of copies, and so what you get when the book sells a lot of copies is you get a lot of feedback, and a lot of it is like, what the hell were you talking about there, April? And so I would get emails about particular parts of the book where people were very annoyed or confused. So, for example, and maybe it's because I'm dealing with tech people, we're numbers people, but people were very annoyed that I had 5 components of positioning, but there were 10 steps. And they were like, no, it's 5 things. It should be 5 steps. And at first I was like, dude, it can be as many steps as I want. Then after a while,
It's
I
my
started
book.
thinking, you know what? The steps that came before the the steps that come before the first component are actually set up, and the things you do after are sort of things you do post. So it could be 5 steps. So I changed that. And then there were a handful of things that I just didn't explain enough. Like, for example, there's a chapter on differentiated value that did not have nearly enough meat on it. And I got loads of questions about that specific step. And I could see people that were trying to do the positioning stuff without me. If they emailed me, that was always the step where they got stuck. So I thought, you know what, if I was to do this again, I would rework that chapter and spend more time on explaining exactly what that is, exactly how you do it. And then there were a couple of things that I just did a bad job explaining, like just straight up bad job explaining. Like, and there's a particular one that I got lots of email about, and and I had this kind of canned response that was like, I know that on page 112 I said this, but what I actually meant was this completely different thing. And why weren't you reading my mind properly? Anyways, so 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 the book was still selling a lot, and I kind of thought, you know what? And after I wrote Sales Pitch, I didn't think that I had another book in me. And I had this thought, well, maybe I go back and I fix all that stuff in the old one. I add the stuff I wanted to add. I fixed the things where I felt I didn't do a perfect job on it the first time and just do a do-over. So here we are.
So you could almost argue then this is like the Blade Runner director's cut of the book then. This is, you've come back, you've taken out the narration, you've fixed up the ending and stuff, and you've tried to make it as kind of perfect as possible. Like, this is the definitive, obviously awesome.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Like, I mean, you don't get a do-over in most things. But if the book wasn't selling, I'd just let it go,
Yep.
But when the book is still selling, you're sort of like, oh man, for every 100 books I sell, I'm going to get 2 emails that say on page whatever you said whatever, and I'm like, let's just fix that. So hopefully, I don't add a bunch of stuff that also confuses people, because I mean, you can't control for that. But I feel like this book is better than the first edition in a lot of ways.
Well, you're the publisher yourself, right? I was say your publisher would be on your back if you didn't say that. But would you say that people then who have read the first edition are going to get a lot of value out of the new version, or is that something that's like
I
more
mean,
of a
it
future
it
proofing thing?
yeah, it depends. Like, the answer to that is it depends. Like, I think if you read the book because you wanted to get kind of a basic education, like positioning 101, how would I actually do it? You probably don't need to go buy the book again. But if you are rolling your sleeves up and you're actually going to get a cross functional team together and work through this thing on your own, then I would say, yeah, the new edition is going to help you more than the old edition. There's also a handful of things like I added some stuff that was very specific to multi-product companies. When I wrote the
Yep.
first book, I wasn't working with a lot of multi-product companies. Most of the companies I worked with only had one product. We were just worried about one thing. Since then, and almost every company I work with now is multi-product company. And so I added a bunch of stuff specific to that. So I would also say if you're a multi-product company, then the second edition is probably you're going to see more of you in that book than the first one, probably. But other than that, like, yeah, I think,
Well, fair
I
enough.
think you don't have to buy the second one.
There
You're
you do.
okay.
Come on,
You're
everyone
okay
should
with
buy
the
the
first
second one.
one.
Get
You
2
don't have to buy
copies.
the second one. But yeah. But anybody new coming at it gets the second one, and that makes me happy.
Absolutely. And I was very excited to see also that you put out a hardcover edition, which I don't think you had the first time around. So you got a certain gravitas that you can put on your bookshelf behind you. But is it also was that kind of a temptation so you could kind of hit people over the head when they got the positioning
Let me
process wrong?
tell you, there's a few reasons for doing the hardcover edition, and and they're all bad. So, so the first one was, um, there was a bootleg hardcover edition going around, a really bad bootleg hardcover edition, where somebody had literally photocopied the paperback and then created a hardcover. And and it was so bad, like the type was running off the edges and things like that. And part of the reason they could get it, and then they would list it on Amazon as the hardcover edition. It had nothing to do with me. But it had my name on it and everything else. And Amazon's usually pretty good about taking these things down when you report it. But it just kept popping up and kept popping up. And this would never have happened if I had a hardcover edition myself. So that was one reason to do it. The second reason, which is to just get rid of this bad bootleg copy, which of course people email me about and say, "Why is your hardcover so shitty?" And I'm like, 'cause I don't have one? I don't know. So then the second reason was some people, especially if they're in-house and they're doing a positioning exercise and they're coming back to the book a lot, people would come up to me at conferences with these beat up copies of this paperback that just looked like they pulled it out of the river. And it's all, things all thinking it's all beat up. And I was like, whoa, some people really need a hardcover because this thing is not good. So I put it there. I don't expect to sell a lot of hardcover editions, but it's there for for the hardcore, and then also to just get rid of this. Again, I'm trying to minimize complaints around here. Then I was getting a lot of complaints about this bootleg hardcover version that was out there, and so now I don't have that.
Okay, so no hitting people around the head for doing the process
No,
wrong
I
is what
did
we're saying.
not yet. I
Not yet.
mean,
You never know.
never
You
say
never know.
never.
Never say never. Right then, for the record, and I know obviously you've had to do this 150 million times, including at least once with me. For people that maybe haven't read the book the first time round, maybe coming into it the second time round, maybe thinking about positioning for the first time, but not really, don't really know what's going on or what it is. How, April, sorry to do this to you, how would you define positioning to the kind of the uninformed?
Sure. So, positioning, it's amazing that it's a concept that's been around a really long time, right? So it's kind of amazing that we do have to go back to the 101 a lot, but we do. I mean, it's not something that you do every day. Like you don't reposition a product every day. So and I will say that in marketing in general, we like to change the definitions of things a lot. And so, if I say branding, for example, like that could mean almost anything, like depending on how you define branding. So positioning is kind of the same thing. So I define positioning this way. Positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at delivering something, some value that a very well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. You can think of it a little bit like context setting for products. Like it kind of takes a customer that doesn't know too much about your stuff and kind of orients them towards your value so that they can figure out what it's all about. At a very fundamental level, it's the answer to the question, like, why pick us over the other guys? Like, why pick us over anything else you could do? In my work, I've taken positioning and sort of broken it out into 5 component pieces. So positioning defines like, who exactly is the competition for you? So if you didn't exist, what would a customer do? Like, and sometimes that's products that don't look anything like you. Like I would use an Excel spreadsheet, or I'd just do it manually, or I'd hire an intern to do it. It, they define it. So that's the first thing. Second thing, it defines what have I got that the other guys don't have? First, from a capabilities perspective, but then also we get to the third component, which is what's the value we can deliver to customers that no one else can. And then we got to define, well, who exactly are these customers? A really good fit for our stuff. And then lastly, what's the market category we intend to win? So it is distinctly different from people will say, well, isn't positioning and messaging just the same thing? And it's like, well, no, it's not. Like positioning is kind of the definition of the stuff that you provide as an input into messaging. Like if you came to me and said, hey, write messaging for my, homepage or something. And I'd say, great, there's a whole bunch of stuff we need to define first. So I have all these questions. Like, so, who do you compete against and how do you win against those folks? And what is the market you want to be positioned in and all these things. So positioning is that. It's kind of the foundation underneath a lot of the stuff we do in marketing and sales.
But it's interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people around strategy these days, like product strategy, company strategy, business strategy, and all the different frameworks and models and stuff for that. And it feels like there's a lot of crossover there between the things that you're talking about, like the kind of fundamental underpinnings of the strategic context that you're in. And it almost feels like to your point about sort of messaging and positioning, sort of positioning is the strategic version and messaging is potentially the tactical version that you might change more, but the
Yeah.
positioning underneath stays the same.
I will tell you something though, like not everything is strategy, right? Strategy is another word that I think everybody, they define it however they want.
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes I've seen companies that'll say, well, we'll do our positioning and that's going to tell product what they should go build. And I don't believe that. Like, I would disagree with that. So, particularly when we're talking about tech companies, like normally what we have is we got the product we have right now, right? And then we have the product that we're building towards, the 5-year out, the 10-year out product. And that's probably the version that we sold to the investors, right? We said, hey, you should invest in us because in 10 years, we're going to be this thing. It's all singing, all dancing. It's amazing. And then you got the thing that you are right now, which ain't that. And then we have a strategy that gets us from A to B, right? So we're going to, once we conquer this market, then we're going to go into the next market, and then we're going to make an acquisition, and then we're going to build this, and then we'll have this kind of data, which will enable us to do this. And so we're going to go from here to step 2, to step 3, step 4, and then we get to, all singing, all dancing thing. So we could have positioning in the market right now that looks nothing like the positioning we've positioned to investors, for example, and that's okay. Those two things are different. And we could have a product strategy that says, in 2 years, we're going to be in a completely different market, selling a completely different thing with completely different positioning, and that's also okay. So I think the strategy should drive positioning, and the strategy should drive your product and what you're building in the product. Positioning is something you do at every step of the way that answers the question, well, why pick us now? Okay, and that's different. Okay, now we're here. Okay, why pick us now? And it's a thing that evolves over time. So having the positioning drive product strategy, I think, is a bit of tail wagging the dog. Like the positioning is very oriented in, we got the product we got right now against the competitors we have right now in the market landscape and the way customers behave right now. Why pick us over everybody else? And that might look completely different when our product comes in the next release or the release after that, or we've done an acquisition and then the answer to all those questions are different. So, if we were just building product to win the thing right now, I'd say, well, you don't have much of a product strategy.
Well, that's something that sadly happens in a lot of companies, but also a lot of companies, to the point that you're raising around like, well, people need to potentially go through a positioning exercise in the first place, kind of suggests that maybe either their positioning is out of date or maybe they never even properly did it and they've kind of just blundered into something, for a series of kind of deals and happenstance that's happened along the way. So
But
in
things
that sort of
also changed, right? Things
Mhm.
change. Like sometimes you've got great positioning and it stops working for things that are entirely out of your control. Like, you're operating a market, everything's going good. And then all of a sudden your big competitor acquires somebody and whoops, all the things you had that were differentiating yesterday are no longer differentiating today. And like, you got to react to that. Or,
Yep.
sometimes we have big thing that happens out of nowhere, like COVID, and you're selling into a market and all of a sudden those companies just aren't buying anything, and so you're going to have
Yep.
to figure out a way to sell into some other market. Or maybe you've got a thing and it's really differentiating and that's all great, but then there's some little upstart raises $100 million and does an acquisition or something, but catches up to you and closes the gap. Well, now what do you do? So you're not necessarily in a bad situation positioning wise because you screwed up. Like the world changes, your product changes, your competitors don't stand still, your customers are changing all the time. And so often you've got positioning that works really well one day, but then, fast forward a year or so and it ain't working that good.
Something about AI probably in there as well, but we'll talk about
And then
AI in a bit.
AI, like, I mean, AI is another one, right? Like, so we're in a situation right now that, 3, 4 years ago, if you didn't have an AI strategy, I think that was okay. Customers aren't asking you about it. But now, I mean, I don't know how you do any sales conversations. It depends on the market. But if you're selling some big enterprise software to a buyer, like you're going to have to be able to articulate the AI strategy and why us and not the other guys. And, should you buy our AI or somebody else's AI? And how is this thing all going to work? Like you're going to have to answer those questions. And again, that wasn't such a big deal 3, 4 years ago.
But it is fair to say that a lot of companies out there these days, whether this is something that they've done through any kind of structured positioning exercise or any kind of marketing at all, but they've kind of just taken an old product that existed for a while and they just pop AI on the front of it or Copilot at the end of it, and they think that that's enough. And I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever used like Office 365 and seen what's the horrors that have happened to that. Like they've murdered the hell out of that one, and it just doesn't even really feel like it's a coherent product anymore. Do you feel there's a risk though, from based on what obviously you have to have an answer, but like if you don't have a proper answer, you do run the risk then of just almost just popping AI at the beginning of the words that you already had, and somehow that's your new position, and it kind of feels like it really isn't.
Like, I think the good thing about where we're at right now is, we've been a couple of years now with this AI stuff being the thing that everybody wants to talk about. And I think in the very early days of that, companies were kind of in a panic in some situations, and you're right, they were just slapping AI on it or doing just some minor AI thing and say, yeah, the AI, we got that too. In the same way, in the early days of the cloud, people just took their on-prem stuff and popped it in the cloud and said, hey, yep, we got the cloud, man, we're here. And that was very different from architecting something natively for the cloud. Now here we are, we're a couple of years into it, and I think companies are more mature, the buyers are more mature, people know more about this stuff. And I don't think this kind of just, slapping it on for the sake of slapping it on, but there isn't really any material value related to AI. I don't think customers want that, and I don't think that works. And I don't see so many companies trying to do that right now as I did, 2 years ago. It was kind of bananas. So I think we're out of that woods, but we still have um depending on the kind of customers you're selling to, there's a certain amount of, well, how is this different? Like, you guys got an AI story, they got an AI story, the other guys I'm talking to have an AI story. Like, what's the difference between these three stories? Like, why pick your thing versus someone else? There's that. And then I think customers right now are really kind of demanding, like, how is this real? Like, show me how this is real. Like, because everybody's talking about what AI can do and it will do. And oh my goodness, like, all the things are going to be amazing. But I'm going to give you today's dollar for today's stuff. So show me what I can do with this thing right now. And how is this going to make money or save money for me right now? And I want real proof of that. It's not going to be enough to just kind of hand wave about it and say, trust me, it'll all be great. In 5 years, it'll be amazing.
Well, that's what a lot of people are trying to do, certainly on the AI provider side at the moment. But fingers crossed they'll get there in the end. But obviously you've talked about you talk in the book, and you talked in the previous version of the book around the kind of the 5 different concepts or components that kind of underpin positioning. So
Yeah.
those themselves appear to have been repositioned. I think you've renamed some of them. Some of them stayed the same. Some of them have got kind of different names. So for
Oh,
example,
yeah. Oh, like, can I tell you about that?
yeah, please,
So
because I'm curious.
I forget in the old book, I mean, you got an old book around, you could look it up. But
Yeah,
there, oh, I know it. So the second component, so the first one is competitive alternatives.
yep,
I don't think that changed.
that's
The
the same.
second one, I called it unique capabilities.
Yep, or unique attributes, I think was in the first book.
Unique
Yeah.
attributes. I think that was it, because I didn't want to use capabilities because it's not always a capability. It could be the way you do pricing or something else, which people don't think is a capability. So I called it an attribute, and I called it unique attribute. Oh man, this caused me a lot of pain. And it's because people were calling me up and going, well, I thought we were unique because none of our competitors have this thing. But you know what? I Googled, and there's 3 guys in a basement that haven't sold anything, but they have it. So it's not unique. So we can't talk about it. And I'm like, oh boy. So, so I wrestled with, so I had this word unique. People got really hung up on that. And, and, and it wasn't what I meant. So I changed it to distinct capabilities. Is that what I called it in the end? I know I changed it because
Yep.
that word unique was driving everybody crazy. So what I actually meant there is that, let's say you're in a market and you compete with some folks that sell big enterprise stuff and some folks that are sort of mid-market folks. And you have a capability that the little guys don't have, but the big guys do. And then you have another capability where it's the opposite. The little guys have it, but the big guys don't. Both those things are distinct capabilities, depending on who you're getting compared to. But are either of those things unique? No, they're not. And so this is where everybody got really hung up. And I thought I described it, what I meant in the words, but you stick a label on something and people are going to take that literally. So I changed the name of that one because people really got hung up on this idea. They're like, but what we have is, it's really, and I did have one guy come up to me and he said, it's really distinct, but I wouldn't call it unique. And I was like, oh, okay, you're right. I've given this the wrong name. So I changed that one.
Yeah, you also changed value and proof to differentiated value and target market characteristics to best fit accounts. So it kind of feels like they're talking about the same thing, but they're almost just
same
refinements
thing.
of the
Yeah,
name,
same
and
thing.
kind of the concepts are the same, right?
Yeah, same thing. I'm just trying to be clear about it. Like what target accounts was more like, I deal mainly with B2B, right?
Yep.
And all the companies I work with are B2B. And so, but in the original book, I think I called it Customers that Care or something like that, which is, I'm basically, what I'm trying to get at is like best fit account. But when I say customer, people would think I'm talking about a person rather than an account. And I'm not. So customer is one of these generic words that we use, and sometimes we're talking about accounts and sometimes we're talking about an actual person, like a persona, a buyer. And so that was confusing to people. And I thought, well, it'd be better to just call it accounts, because then it would be clear that we're talking about characteristics of an account as opposed to characteristics of the person who is the champion inside the account, which we are not talking about at that step. So those things are the same. I'm just trying to get clear about the labels, because again, like, you wouldn't see it so much if you did 50, 60 workshops, but after you've done like 300 of them and you've had enough people say, so we're talking about the persona, and I'm like, oh God, no. But I wouldn't say anything's really changed in those steps other than, again, I'm trying to be clearer about stuff.
I think one thing has changed though, unless I missed it when I was reading through the second edition, which is you used to have a bonus sixth component,
Oh, yeah.
which was relevant trends.
Yeah.
And I couldn't seem to see that anymore. So I wondered if trends are not relevant anymore, or if people are maybe misusing them, or if you're worried about trends in some other way. Like, what's the story with trends?
So originally I had this idea, and it was mainly because people didn't understand positioning. So because people, and that's really changed in my opinion. I think that the base level knowledge of what positioning is, I think, has improved from 6 years ago. And particular, if I talk about a market category, I think the concept of a market category is much better understood now than it was 6, 7 years ago. But if I rolled it back 6, 7 years ago, people were very confused about the difference between a market category and what I referred to in the book as a trend, but it could be like, cloud computing, right? The cloud computing is not a market category. It's a trend. It's a technology. It's a thing, and it applies to multiple market categories. And so I had this whole chapter explaining what the difference of that is. And in the early days of the work I was doing with companies, it was a good distinction to make because people were confused about that. But then they stopped being confused about it, and I never got any questions about it again. And not only that, in some cases, it is confusing and it can be both a trend and a market category. AI, for example. So if you started talking about AI, I mean, you could say, well, there are the model providers, and then there are, like when I say AI, it means 1,000 different things. Some of those are market categories and some are not. Very confusing. And so I thought, you know what? I actually get zero questions about this in workshops anymore. Nobody ever comes to me and says, is our category this? And I thought, and I was looking for stuff to cut because I don't want this book to be super long. And I thought, you know what? I don't think I actually need this trends bit because I don't get any questions about it. People seem to get it now. It's not solving a problem anymore. It's just complication for complication's sake. So I took it out.
Fair enough. You've got to be brutal and, What,
Well, again,
prioritize
I'm
what
trying
stays
to
in and
make the
out, right?
thing clearer, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm not trying to put a bunch of stuff in, like, I mean, let's face it, positioning is a complicated concept, and I could probably write 7 books worth of material on positioning if I wanted to say every single thing that you might encounter, and that is not the job of this book, right? The job of this book is to arm you with a process that you don't even have to follow the process exactly. It's just giving you a bunch of stuff that you could use to do this thing on your own. And so it is not the complete, Encyclopedia Britannica of positioning. It's not covering every edge case. It's not covering every single concept that you might encounter. What I'm trying to do is give you the big stuff. And so this trends thing just didn't feel like it belonged there anymore. It was just like, nope, I'm going to nuke that.
Well, fair enough. And mate, rest in peace. But obviously, you talked about the fact that you've kind of simplified stuff, and part of that simplification was condensing the 10-step plan down to a 5-step plan. Although I understand,
Steps are
obviously,
all
that,
there. Yeah.
well, yeah, because you've kind of moved
I
some steps
repositioned
before.
them.
You've repositioned. There's a lot of positioning jokes that we haven't made on this podcast that we probably could have done, like with the positioning of the text on the page on the hardback and stuff. But so you've got this kind of now pre-section, then you've got the
Yeah,
5-step plan, and then you've got a post-section.
correct.
But many of, or most, or some of, well, I'd say the majority of the concepts are at least mentioned in passing. I know you've expanded on some of them since in the new book as well. But obviously that first part, the kind of the pre-stage where you're kind of trying to sort of line everything up and get people ready and able to do this stuff. One of the things that I like to know, and I'm not sure if it was in the first one or if it was just written in a different way, was it kind of around this positioning readiness check and this kind of like,
Yeah.
this is what you need to do or have to get started. So I guess a really important question that people might ask is, well, what do they need? What are the kind of the preconditions for them to get going with the 5 steps?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a bunch of things. And again, like a lot of this stuff I touched on in the old book, but it was just kind of sprinkled around. And it wasn't kind of set up with like, look, before you even get going, there's a set of decisions you gotta make, right? So one of them is now the right time to even do this? Like, are we ready to do positioning or are we not? Because if we're pre-launch and we don't have any customers yet, like my process assumes that you've got customers. You can use the process to develop what I would call a positioning thesis, but you should be aware that that's what you're doing instead of saying, well, we're doing positioning and we're going to dial it right in and that's it. And, so that's one of the things. But there's a handful of other things like um, people, like a lot of the companies that call me, they'll call me and they're multi-product companies. So I've got a company and I've got 3 products and they'd say, we'd like to do some positioning work. And I say, okay. And they describe it, we got the company, we got these 3 products. And I'll say, okay, so exactly what are we going to position? Right? Are we doing the company? Are we doing an individual product? And some of that depends on your go-to-market strategy, for example. So like if I sold one product to everybody and then the other 2 products were just add-on products or cross-sell, upsell products, then maybe I would start with the lead product and position that instead of doing company positioning, which would be a little bit more confusing. And so there's some, as opposed to if I have 3 products, but the customer could buy any one of the 3 products, well, maybe I need company positioning that allows me to talk about all 3. And then the customer can say, okay, I want 1 and 2, but I don't necessarily need 3, that kind of thing. So figuring out what exactly you got to position, I think is another thing that's, a decision to make before you get in there. And there's some other stuff, but I think these are the big ones, right? Are we ready to do this right now? What exactly are we going to position? Like, do we, you know, like, are we ready to even start this? Which I think is a good conversation for anybody to have before they get into it. Because if you don't settle on that stuff, then what happens is you get halfway through and then somebody says, well, wait a second, why aren't we just positioning this thing or that thing? Or don't we really need the company positioning first before we do this other thing? And I've seen positioning efforts get kind of derailed halfway through because people weren't clear on the decisions before they came in. And so it's better to just handle that stuff first.
So in that sort of situation, though, you're talking about maybe a company that probably shouldn't have been doing any repositioning at that point because they had other priorities, or is it more that they started to position the wrong thing or the wrong level?
Well, sometimes I think what they have is a kind of a go-to-market question, right? Like that hadn't ever really been surfaced. So I did have a company call me and they said, "We want you to position the whole company." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, what are the products?" And then we went through all the products. But then it was clear there was a lead product. Like that, and I was like, "Well, hang on. Like, do you always sell this one first?" And they're like, "Yeah, we always sell that one first."
Yep.
Oh, and then you would sell the other thing as cross-sell and not upsell. And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Why don't we just do the lead product?" And they had to go away and think about that a little bit, right? Like, is that actually the way they want to go to market? Or is that just how the sales team is selling it?
Yep.
And so they had to make that decision. Do we want to do that? Or do we actually wish that people were buying more things from us in the first purchase? Now, in their case, they came back and said, no, the most efficient way to sell this thing is to land and expand. So then we backed up and positioned the land product so that we could do that. But I've had other ones where the people come and they're like, look, we've been doing this land and expand thing, but we now have products that, you know, we would actually like them to be attached when the product gets bought, or they could even start in a different place than this typical land thing. In which case, well, okay, now we're going to back up and we're going to position the whole thing as a suite of products, which is different underneath an umbrella. So there's some of these things are like kind of go to market strategy things that have evolved over time. And yeah, nobody's really rationalized it necessarily. Sometimes it's an acquisition triggers this. And so it's not like the people are being stupid about it, but it's like everything's changed, right? And it's probably a good time to lean back and think about it. But the time to think about it is before you go into the positioning exercise, not when you're at step 4 and then someone puts up their hand and says, "Well, wait a second. Why are we doing it this way?" It's way better to make the decision beforehand, and then we'll go through and everybody's on the same page.
There was an interesting part of that section where I think you were talking about, for example, if you're a company that maybe sells into different verticals, like I think you called out banking and insurance, for example, as examples there, and this kind of idea that maybe they need to come up with completely different positioning for each of the verticals that they're selling into, even though they're selling maybe even the same product into the same configurations of the same product into both of those verticals. I think you called out in the book that you probably still just need one position there, right? Rather than just like multiple positions maybe that conflict with each other. So like,
Yeah.
why would you say it's a mistake then to kind of come up with sub positions per segment, for example?
Well, often the companies come to me and there just be an assumption that the assumption is, look, we couldn't possibly have the same positioning for banking as we do for retail, for example. We just couldn't. They're totally different industries. They do totally different things. But, I come from this with the idea like, look, if they're buying the exact same product, it, 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 it wouldn't surprise me if the positioning weren't the same. And in fact, in my experience, the positioning is the same. We might we would definitely use different customer examples to talk about it. We might use different terminology when we talk about the value proposition. But the actual value that we could deliver is likely the same. So I give you an example. So I worked for this company and I came in as the VP marketing. We did this and I was new and a lot of the previous VP marketings had been fired. So I was a little bit worried about getting fired because I was like number 8 or something. Anyways, I came in, we did this big analysis of the customers, two big pockets. We had retail and we had utilities. And these are really different. So
Yep.
yeah, retail's utilities. And so if you looked at what the sales people were doing, they had completely different pitch decks, completely different positioning on the website. On the website basically was a fork in the road. You came and it was like, tell me first, are you utilities or whatever? And then we would send you down your path. Um, but when you went and talked to customers, the thing that we had was like infrastructure, right? And it was data infrastructure. And the use case was the same for different purposes. So in retail, we had this thing that was essentially this hot backup swap over thing so that if something failed, it would automatically switch over to something else, even if you had a really heterogeneous environment, really complex back end stuff. And so basically, the problem we were solving is we don't ever want the cash registers to stop working because it's bad for business. And then, exact same thing in utilities. We don't want the lights to go out. So, same. So, you would think it was different, but in the end, our core value proposition about, making sure stuff is always running and you're never down was the same.
Yeah.
So eventually what we had was one homepage that talked about that at a high level, making sure, business continuity and blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, sure, we had specific pages for each of those. But if you had a conversation with our sales reps, the pitch deck for those two segments was the same. Like we were talking about the same value props. We used a different customer example. There were a couple of places we had slightly different wording, but otherwise it was exactly the same. So most of the companies I go into, you would think, okay, like maybe the competitors are different. So you would say, well, we have different competitors, therefore there'd be different, distinct capabilities, therefore different value. But what usually happens is we may have different competitors, distinct capabilities are pretty much the same, and then we translate it to value and it's the same. We might have 2 points of value and it's A and B in one segment, but in the other segment, you would actually rank it the opposite, where it's B and A, but it's kind of the same. And so I've seen very few examples. One of them was when I was at IBM and we had this product, we were selling it globally, and we had a competitor that only existed in China. And when we sold into China, we had slightly different positioning there. But I've only seen that happen a handful of times. The vast majority of the companies I've worked with, like we go into it saying, okay, well, let's just see. Let's just see whether we get to different value. Because the reality is, if we did get to different value, let's say that other company, we did it and the value for the retail people was completely different than the value for utilities, then I got way bigger problems than positioning, right? The problem is that what these people want from my product is fundamentally different. So how do I build a product roadmap for that? Like at some point we're forking the product or we're building modules that add on or we're doing something because, what the customers want is totally different. And so I've seen lots of that where we've gotten to a fork in the road and it's like, oh dear, the use cases are totally different. And we're going to have to decide, are we chasing both these segments? Are we going to pick one or the other? Are we going to fork the product? Are we going to have a core product with modules and we sell these modules to these guys and there's other modules to these guys? So it's not surprising to me that most of the time when a company comes to me and they're successful and they're growing and they're out there doing stuff across multiple segments, that our positioning would be the same. If it wasn't, then they'd be 5 products and not one.
Well, I've seen some things, I'm sure you've seen some things where, that they kind of just try and just do their best and don't really pick any of those options. But, let's not name and shame. But you also talked in the book about identifying your champion persona. Starts to make me think a little bit of our mutual buddies, Matt and Brent, and all of their work with the Challenger sale and kind of, building the advocacy within organizations and kind of almost having people that can almost help you sell it within the organization. And you're talking very specifically in the book about how the champion persona, that's the person that you're positioning for, right? You're not positioning for the 5, 6, 10 other people that might be involved in the sales process as well. You're laser focused on that champion persona. On the other hand, you sit there and say, well, those other 5, 10, whatever people that are going to be involved in a deal, and as you put in the book, could kill the deal at any point if they really, the CIO or the head of this or the head of that. They all kind of have their own needs and desires, and they've only got their own sort of mental models and stuff too. So how come we don't need to create positions for them? Is it something that sort of goes above whatever you do for them, or like do we just ignore them? Like, why don't they get a position too?
Yeah, we don't get to just ignore them, unfortunately, much as we would like to. But here's the way this works, at least, most of the time. And I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but most of the time what we've got is if I'm selling an enterprise B2B deal and it's a big deal, so let's say I'm selling a deal as $100K. How does a $100K deal get done inside an organization? Usually what happens is there's a big boss who's what we would call the financial buyer. Like they are going to write the check. It comes out of their budget, whatever. But that person is senior and busy and can't be bothered and they pick someone to go figure it out. So, the head of sales says, the CRM sucks. Go get us a new CRM. And they go down the chain and maybe they've got, a sales ops person or something. And they say, you go figure it out. Go come back here and tell us which CRM we should buy. And then we'll go figure it out. So now I'm the sales ops person. And my job is to make a short list. But my other job is to make sure that whatever I pick, the constituents that care are all okay with it. And so in that case, if we say it's a CRM, well, I don't want to pick a CRM that the salespeople hate and won't use because that would suck, right? And I can't pick a CRM that doesn't meet our compliance stuff and our security stuff. And I'm probably going to have IT is going to babysit this thing. So I got to make sure IT is on board. So if you think about it, my positioning really needs to work for the champion because otherwise I don't even make it onto the short list, right? I don't get anywhere near these other people. But I also have to arm that person to handle the potential objections of these other constituents. So if we think about the concept of value, for example, like in that scenario, there's no value for IT. Like IT, like this thing isn't for IT. IT is getting foisted upon IT, and Isley IT like, oh great, you come in with this thing, and so all they have is their list of potential complaints. Can I manage this thing? How hard is it to integrate in the thing we got? Is it going to play nice with my thing? Oh, gee, we're a Microsoft shop. Is this a Microsoft thing? Because otherwise I don't want to touch it. So there's no value for these guys, but there's a whole bunch of objections. Often end users might be a little bit different, but often the end users are just, is this a pain? Like, am I going to hate this? Is it too hard for me to learn? Is it all this other stuff? Like there might be, the end user's not looking at it like the champion's looking at it. Like, is this going to help us make money or save money? And all the rest of the constituents are sort of like, does this meet the basic requirements? Because, we're going to have to deal with this thing. Now, when you go up the chain, the economic buyer might have a slightly different version of value than the champion does. But I don't have to worry about that until he has to go up to the chain. And then at that point, I'm way into the detail, right? So I have to arm the champion to go have that conversation. But that's very different than the messaging positioning I'm dealing with to get on the short list in the first place, to get a deal cooking. That's really what we want to nail, because if we don't get on the short list and we don't make it past call one, then we don't even get to worry about any of these other people. That's my thing. Like when I first started in this stuff, people were weird about personas. Like I remember doing a persona exercise in the second company I ever worked for when I was junior. And they said, look, we have a deal team and the deal team includes all these people and we need to do persona work on each of them. So we would be sitting there trying to figure out what is the value of our CRM to the CISO. And guess what? There isn't any. Like there isn't. All we need to do is prove to the CISO that it ticks the boxes, right? Are you shocked too? Yes, we are. Like, will we pass the pen test? Yes, we've got one. Here it is. There's no value. It's just objections. And so it took me a long time to get my head around that because I don't think anybody really understood it at the time. And people were so nuts about personas that they thought we had to do these big personas. And what I found was we had one persona that mattered, was the champion, and the rest of them stayed in the binder and we never looked at it again.
So then to replay that, it's all about good objection handling, which obviously is then something, again, going back to Brent and Matt and the challenge of customer, I think specifically where you're going in there and you're kind of arming the people that, I think when I had Brent on the podcast, you're kind of arming people to kind of, as you put it, sort of diffuse the objections internally. That's so right. That you don't have to do it for them, which sounds a bit of a ninja move there. Yeah.
But it's usually happens later in the deal. Now, sometimes what you have, like, for example, sometimes you'll have a particular kind of software where it's the business person is the champion, but that business person knows that this thing is not going to fly if it doesn't meet IT's requirement. So they may have some of that baked into that they want to just tick off in the first call. Like, is it SOC 2? Is it this? Is it that? Will it, is it a Microsoft thing because we're a Microsoft shop? Like, there might be some stuff like that. But again, it's objection handling. So some of that objection handling you might have to do very early in the deal cycle, but it's still objection handling. It's not value.
Fair enough. Well, one of the things that you say, touching and keeping with the sales topic, is that one of the things you should do after you've gone through the whole positioning process, which is obviously mapped out the 5 steps in your book, is you then obviously need to go and test that the positioning works. And you kind of sort of start this example of what a lot of people do at that point, which is, just kind of update the website, put some new messaging up or whatnot, which obviously is an important part of it. But at the same time, that's kind of how they do their next step of validation. But you have a different approach in mind as the kind of the first best step that you can take, which is actually going to get this out into the sales deck or into sales conversations early and sort of see how it lands. So why is that a better idea than doing the kind of, the messaging and updating the website and starting to see how it looks?
Yeah. This comes from, and again, you have to take all of this from my perspective. So everybody I'm dealing with is B2B software and has a sales team. So what I found is that if I did messaging if I did messaging for my positioning and just put it up on the website and then just tried to go from there, nothing would change over in sales. So it never survived the jump over to sales. And this was very annoying to me. So, we'd have this positioning and we think it's beautiful. We're running these campaigns and all this stuff. People come to the website and then they're converting and then they're whatever. And then they go over to sales and then we get this first call and the sales is saying like something totally different. And you're like, man, that sucks. And so I thought, well, okay, we're going to have to make this thing work for sales. Now, if you think about positioning, if we really wanted to test positioning, it would make a lot of sense for us to test it live with a customer as opposed to just doing, like, for example, a A/B landing page test on it. And let's do the old positioning, new positioning. We'll do A/B landing page test, and then we'll see which one works better. And, it might be possible to do that, but you're testing a lot more than just the positioning. You're testing my translation of the positioning into messaging. We're testing the design of the landing pages and all that stuff. We're testing, like, we don't know, like, can we control for who the people are that are actually seeing the 2 different tests? And are they even customers that we care about? Or are they just like, folks getting there, just doing random searches and things like that? So there's so much I can't control for if I'm doing a test like that. Whereas if I take the positioning, turn it into a sales pitch, then I'm having a conversation with the customer. And not only do I get to see whether or not it lands, but I also get to understand why. So if the customer comes in and the customer's like, hey, yeah, that sounds great. You guys are just like Salesforce. And you're like, no, we're nothing like Salesforce. So we know, oh my gosh, they're making the wrong comparison. They don't get who to compare us to. There's something not working in our market category. Or if the people are like, making a face like, oh, that's confusing. Or if they're getting really excited and asking a lot of questions, we know that's working. And so it kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone to take the positioning, turn it into a good solid sales pitch, train 1 or 2 reps on it, and then let's get it in front of qualified prospects. Now I've controlled for, am I pitching to the right person? Yes, I am. Can I tell whether it's working or not? Yes, I can. Can I see exactly the parts of the pitch that are working and the parts that aren't? You'll get a flavor for that. And so I think you just get a lot more signal if you test the thing with the sales team. At the same time, what you're doing is I'm getting a couple of sales reps really comfortable with this pitch. And when I'm ready to say, okay, the pitch is done and we've tuned it, I've got a couple of sales reps that are really good at it. And I can then use those reps to build the script for it, do a video of those folks doing that stuff. And I can have those reps train the rest of the sales team. And now I got sales training sales instead of marketing training sales, which has never worked in the history of anything. And so, so that just has worked way better for me than treating it like a little marketing thing, and marketing's going to go test it over in the marketing department, and sales doesn't have to concern themselves with it. And so if I can get the thing working in sales, then I know that it works. Now all I got to do is have messaging on the front end that makes that story consistent, and I got control over that. So if I can make it work for sales, then I can back into making it work for marketing. That's way easier.
Isn't there a potential risk, depending obviously on the company and the type of people that they sell to, that you could accidentally, like if you did a really bad job at the positioning stage, whatever, you can kind of almost start burning prospects at that point, because they'll be like, oh, hey, throw their hands up and go after a competitor, because actually your whatever came out the back of it was so off target that they start to
Yeah.
doubt you? Or do you think that there are ways to
Yeah.
mitigate that as well?
Yeah. That's the risk. I mean, you're probably burning prospects right now because your positioning sucks right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the alternative? I'm burning my whole upstream pipeline, and I don't know it's burnt for 6 months because it takes that long for it to get all the way through to close win,
Yep.
close loss. Might as well do it right at the source.
Fair enough. If you're going to burn it quickly, I guess.
I mean, do it quickly, right? And like, here's the thing. When we're doing that test, we're pitching, and then we're caucusing, and then we're adjusting. So if the first pitch is a disaster, like the customer's like, what? That's stupid. I hate it. Slam the door. Then, well, like, we ain't pitching the same pitch twice.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back and we're adjusting it. I've never had that happen, but I have had ones where we had, a word, like I had ones where we were using a word that the customer just had an allergic reaction to, that we did not anticipate them having that reaction, that word. So we had one where we did the thing, whatever, we did the test pitch, and we said the word, and the customer was like, oh, don't say that. And we're like, why not? Right. And then you get to ask the question, why not? Oh, well, in our industry, that word has a very specific meaning, and it means this. And we didn't know because we'd never used that word before. And we're like, okay, that word is dead to us now, man. We're we're gonna go back, fix the deck, come back. I've had other ones where, we've got a graphic that kind of explains, here's what the whole company does, and here's how it's whatever. And I've had ones where first time we did the pitch, the customer's looking at that graphic going, what the heck is that? Or why are you saying that? You guys don't do that. Or you do this. And we're like, no, it doesn't mean that, and then it's like, okay, we're chucking the graphic, right? So it's not like we're going to have 50, it's not like we're going to do 10 pitches where we're like, everyone's like, I hate you. It's like if there's something that people have a real reaction to, it's out of there instantly. And then we're back to whatever. We're trying not to pivot for every single pitch because different prospects are going to be different. But if there's something that's obviously off and we could lean back and objectively look at it and say, well, if that guy thinks that, probably everybody else is going to think that too, we should fix that, then we fix it. So we get a chance to iterate on it before we let it go live, which is much more contained than me putting on a homepage where everyone's going to see it and go, oh my God, that word.
What the hell is that? For God's sake.
What the hell? What is wrong with those people? Yeah.
Now, I hate to bring it up as we come to a close, but, AI is obviously on everyone's lips at the moment. So I guess we have to go there. And I guess,
No, we
people
can't
are
talk
talking
about
about
anything else. It's a rule now.
That's
Gotta talk
okay. We're
about
going
AI.
to
There's no
compress
other
this
topics.
into a few short minutes just to kind of get some hot takes. But like, obviously, people are saying that AI is killing just about every job. Some people are saying that AI is killing just about every job. Product managers, product marketing, developers, everyone's under threat from.
Have you seen that? Like, have you
I
met
see it all over
anybody?
the place. 100x
No, but have
this,
you met anybody that got fired specifically because they got
no,
replaced by an AI?
not that I could mention, or not that I could kind of come up with off the top of
Like,
my
I know
head.
people that have gotten fired, but not
Oh, yeah.
replaced by the machine. Like they've been,
Most of the times I see
their job
people
has gone
getting
to a
fired.
different person who's not
Yeah.
as expensive.
Or because they're downsizing, or because, like we all know, companies overhired in the pandemic or whatever. Like, as of yet, have not seen people like specifically, or AI specifically being the explicit cause for that. But of course, as we discussed before we started recording, it's quite clear that a lot of people are using it as an excuse, like Jack Dorsey, for example, kind of classically bad at running companies once they get past the startup stage, overhiring, having to fire people, but saying it's AI, so that means that he doesn't look like a bad leader.
I mean, there's a lot of things I think happening. It's not only that people got overhired, it's that there's people got hired for really high salaries,
Yeah.
and I think salaries are coming down, and so there's a bit of that going on. And then we're certainly being, in tech companies specifically, we're certainly being more productive with AI. Like there's certainly things that people are doing that they can move faster and do more things. But I also think in tech companies, there's always more things to do.
Yeah.
Like,
That's exactly it. Open up
we're
more avenues and
we're
stuff, right?
never done with the things. And so if we can move faster, then why wouldn't we do that? Like, why wouldn't we just move faster and do more
100%.
things instead of say, oh, wow, we have these people. Now we can do the same number of things with half the number of people. What I think the thinking would be more like we can do double the
Do more
things with
stuff.
the
Yeah.
same people. But so I think there's that happening. But I don't know. I think we also have weird things going on the buyer side right now that companies are,
Build all themselves, apparently.
yeah, and they're worried about making big commitments to software that might be, out of date in a couple of years. And so I think the buyers of software are being a lot more discerning now. I think they're slowing their roll on purchases. I think they're doing shorter commitments because they don't want to commit to things because there's so much uncertainty about what AI can and can't do 2 years out. Like not so much right now, but 2 years out, is this going to look like a bad purchase? And that's got to impact everybody. But yeah,
But one thing that it could impact very specifically in this context is people could sit there and say, oh, hey, I can just crank some stuff into an LLM and get my positioning out the back and I don't have to talk to
yeah,
anyone or do any of this stuff. Like, I don't
yeah.
know if you've seen anyone try to do that, but I
Oh
wondered
my
if you
god,
had any
everybody,
thoughts or
everybody. Like I get lots of these emails and they're like, "Oh, I just asked, Chatty G what my positioning should be." Here's the thing though, and I think the thing you got to think about. Like I do think there might be some value in having a conversation with Claude or ChatGPT about aspects of your positioning to maybe expand your thinking on it.
Yep.
But there's some things that, because those models are trained on publicly available data, a lot of the inputs into your positioning are things that no one would know except people inside your company. So even something as simple as who do you compete with? Like I think ChatGPT is going to give you a pretty bad answer on that. I think Claude's going to give you a really bad answer on that. Um, and I think nobody really knows that. Like, I mean, I think those tools, like a search engine, could tell you who you could compete with, who you should compete with. It doesn't tell you who ends up on a short list in deals. And that is often really surprising. Like, often who we see on a short list is really surprising. We're like, why the hell would customers put these guys up against us? But here we are. Um, Often it doesn't understand very well what the status quo is, like the specifics around the status quo. Like, is it just a spreadsheet? Is it a spreadsheet manual processes? Are they doing part of it with their old accounting program because they consider that to be accounting? Like the nuances of that stuff. And that competitive landscape thing is really important. It is our stake in the ground where we start and we say, what do we got to position against? And only your internal team knows what your loss rate looks like versus any one of these potential competitors. Only your internal team knows who ends up on a short list. Only your internal team knows the proportion of companies you sell to that have this as a status quo versus this as a status quo. So I think we have to be very careful there. The other one is uh, people will, there's this idea of a synthetic customer and that
Yep.
I could create a synthetic customer and then kind of use that to simulate something. And I think in certain cases that could be interesting to do, but I think it's very hard for to build a synthetic customer that knows how a company buys, because that is usually something that's a secret.
Yeah.
Like, so, you know, and every company has a different rule. So for example, lots of companies, if you're selling to a big company and the purchase is less than 200K, it doesn't have to go to purchasing. But if it's over 200K, it does have to go to purchasing. And if it goes to purchasing, here's the process, right? Or, you know, does this company care? Is there a security review before you do a purchase? Yes or no? Some companies do it and some companies don't. Like, I don't know. Like, in some cases, your synthetic customer might be able to flag that. In other cases, no. Um, I don't know if you can make generalizations about the risk tolerance or, how many companies they put on a short list and then how they do that. Or does the company want to do a proof of concept or not want to do a proof of concept? And all these kinds of things are very specific to how a customer buys, not the customer's attitude or preferences or whatever. And so now we might get really smart about this stuff, and there's some things that I think are promising. So, for example, Gong has some pretty sophisticated stuff in their stuff, and if you were good at setting up Gong and having Gong record every first call with every prospect and then track that through to who was successful, like who did you successfully close versus not successfully close, and then go back and look at the patterns around that stuff. Ooh, like that would be
There you
actually
go. There's
really
the magic in
cool.
there.
Um, I have not seen anybody doing anything that sophisticated yet, although I've seen some flavors of it. I have seen some companies doing things like tracking competitors, like who gets mentioned and who doesn't in calls.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they're not taking it all the way through to who closed and who didn't. So, I don't care if they get mentioned and then we never got a deal cooking in the first place because we were a shitty fit, or they got mentioned and we immediately disqualified them. So they never made it past the first call and therefore they're not really, you know. And again, if I had 3 smart salespeople sitting in the room, I could figure this out way faster.
Yep.
But so I think there's potential there in all these stuffs to have AI be a good augment to this kind of work. But I think folks should be pretty careful about, if you're just handing the work over to AI, I think you're going to get a pretty lousy result today. For
So it
all
could
those
be better than
reasons,
some
right?
people get on
Because
their own, though, right?
they don't know. But, maybe what you do is you take the thing, you prime it with all your information, you put in everything you know, and then you can do things and talk to it and all that kind of stuff. And could you do that? Yeah. But I mean, it's like, if you look at the way I'm doing positioning now, we're getting a cross-functional team together and we're getting it done in 3 days. So,
Yep.
it's not like the thing is super inefficient and we're trying to drive some efficiency. What I see more often is people don't want to do the work of getting the cross-functional team together. And that is a mistake because
Yeah.
you might come up with positioning, you will not make it stick. You will not.
Well, it's
And so
still.
if you're doing the AI thing to avoid talking to people, I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. But are there things you can do with it to augment what you're doing? Yeah. I do think there's things. But I said the same thing about CRM. Like, if we had great tracking in CRM, then I would know a lot of this stuff and I wouldn't have to have salespeople sitting in these meetings. But we do a terrible job of tracking it. So I don't think that's gonna, so again, like, until we get really good tools that can track this stuff automatically so that people don't have to track it, then the fastest, the most efficient, effective way to do it is give me 2 or 3 experienced sales reps, and I know how to get it out of them, and that's pretty efficient. I didn't have
Ways
to
to make
train
you talk.
anything. I just had to ask them the right questions.
So just to clarify then, no April bot on the horizon anytime soon.
Well, I mean, oh my God, there's thousands of them.
No official April bot.
Yeah, well, I mean, there could be. I mean, people send me one of these every week. They say, "Oh, great news, April. You're never gonna have to talk to anyone again. You just put this thing on your website and it'll go." And so far they've been, you know, I'm surprised at how bad they are, to be honest. Like, I expected them to be better by now. Like, the early ones were really, really bad. Like, I would say, how would you, like, the early ones, people would send it to me and say, "Look, I trained this thing on all your stuff. I put all 9,000 podcasts in there, blah, blah, blah." And then I just ask a question. I'd say, "How would April Dunford position HubSpot? Like, what is the process she would use?" And it would say, "April Dunford would use a positioning statement."
Like
And I'm
first
like, "Oh
part of
my
the book
God."
that says don't do it.
Dude, I've talked about how positioning statements suck in every single podcast. How'd you miss that? But the training data was like, how does the world do positioning? Well, the world does positioning using a positioning statement, and that's been around way longer than April Dunford. So it just assumes that April Dunford, like the rest of the world, would do it that way. Now it's better now in that it will, for the most part, you say April Dunford has this thing and it's X number of steps, and she would break it into, because a lot of my stuff is out there. Um, but almost every time it messes up something really, really basic that's kind of stupid. Like it'll make up a step and say like it'll say there's 7 components to positioning, and I'm like, well, I can't wait to find out what the other 2 components are. And it'll just be something random stuck in there, and I'm like, because you should be able to at least learn, right? You should be able to at least go in and say, okay, how does April Dunford do this? Like that should be
Yep.
easy question to answer. Like, my God, I've made all this content, people. Like this should be easy question to answer. But it does still get some really fundamental things wrong, and I find that disappointing. But then, you know, April bot, yeah, maybe some point. I'm surprised it isn't better. Isn't better than it is right now, to be honest. But eventually, I think some of this stuff feels really easy to me. Like, I don't know why you can't do it now. But I don't think you're going to be able to. Like, I think there might be value in an April bot that understands all my stuff and has listened to every podcast and can answer questions. That should be easy. We should be able to do that now, although I haven't seen a good one yet. Um, but being able to actually say, how should we position this and get a good answer, for the amount of information you would have to put into it to get that, it would be more efficient to just get the cross-functional team together and get everybody's
Actually
buy-in
talk to
while you're
people.
at it, because getting everyone's buy-in is actually the hard part.
It's always about the humans. Now, this is the
Yeah.
point where I normally ask my guests on the podcast where people can find them. They always say LinkedIn, but the last time you and I had a drink, we were talking about our LinkedIn and
So
how
I'm a
much you hate it,
LinkedIn hater.
and how and how you don't go there anymore. So I guess you can put the boot into LinkedIn if you want. But where can people come
I'm
and
kind
find
of
you?
down on LinkedIn in the moment. I think LinkedIn is consultants talking to consultants, and I don't really need to talk to other consultants. But I do post stuff on LinkedIn now and then, so you can follow me on LinkedIn if you like to do that. You might, occasionally, if I got something big going on, like a new book coming out or something, I'll post about that on LinkedIn. But I don't sit around thinking, oh, I have to post every day on LinkedIn. I'm not one of those people. But if you go to aprildunford.com, you can see there's a podcast, there's a newsletter, there's some stuff. Occasionally I get motivated to create a bunch of content, and if I do, it's there. But that's the best place to find me.
Oh, fair enough. Well, I'll make sure to link all of that into the show notes, including LinkedIn, just in case people want to go and kind of submit themselves to the torture there. Love to
Yeah,
see their
see, I
positioning
feel bad
statement.
that way. I'm like, nobody should actually be spending any time there. I don't think it's a good use of your time. You could go other places.
AI posts are being replied to by AI comments. It's
Oh my
just,
gosh. Oh my
it's
gosh.
like the
They're really
Moss
gonna need to
Isley of,
figure that out.
well, if only someone at LinkedIn was still listening. But in any case, that's not our job. That's not our responsibility.
Not.
April, it's always a pleasure to catch up. Shame it's going to be our last time on the podcast based on your
That's
earlier
it.
comments, but
That's it. We're
hopefully
done.
we can still stay in touch and kind of watch each other bouncing around on Strava like we have been.
Yeah.
Obviously, as for now, thanks for taking the time.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.